My name is Mike. I'm a professor for social management, and you are listening to Managing Around, the podcast about social sciencing and magic managing.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Managing Around, the bi-weekly podcast about social science, culture, and management. I am teaching management basics in full-time and in service courses within a program for social pedagogy. I am often asked by my students, why is it so important to learn about organizational management and leadership? Actually, it's a very challenging question, and an answer is not that easy to give. Nevertheless, I'm happy to share some thoughts with you. In today's episode, we will first explore what leadership is and what approaches have been discussed in classical management literature. We will start today with the question of what leadership is and how the relationship between leaders and followers can be influenced. Okay then, let's start with the first question of what leadership is and what does it mean in the context of social work and social service organizations. Recently, newfound attention has been given to leadership managerialism, particularly within the social work and community service sector. What leadership is has been much debated in the literature. The definition of leadership varies widely. However, it can be characterized by someone's ability to empower others on an individual, organizational, and community level. Leadership is also observed by how well a leader is able to collaborate, solve problems, influence others into action, create change, and many things more. Leadership follows different approaches, including transformational leadership and distributed leadership. Within the health and community service sector, distributed leadership helps to develop a learning organization. If you are a newly qualified practitioner with no formal leadership position, you may well undertake leadership roles, such as in a team or a project. There is also a distinction between leadership and management. Leadership is usually considered as an activity towards change and innovation, while the management is somewhat related to the administration and operational activities within an organization. Leadership in social service organizations has been understood as an additional professional perspective considered to be a counterbalance to the influence of an overwhelming managerialism in everyday practice. Let's summarize the first lesson learned for today. What is leadership? Leadership is the ability of leaders to empower other people and to influence the relationship between leaders and followers. In short, leadership is to have followers. Let's come to the second question of today. What leadership approaches have been discussed in classical management theory? There exist different approaches in classical leadership theory with regard to three different ways, including traits, the style, and contingency. Regarding the trait approach, leadership is characterized by, for example, self-confidence, extroversion, and masculinity. According to the style approach by, for instance, Kurt Lewin, leaders choose between an authoritative, cooperative, or laissez-faire style when working with subordinates. And finally, contingency approaches highlight the situation or context that determines a leader's style and focus. However, these approaches to leadership received a lot of criticism. They do not only tend to disregard, quote, informal sources of leadership within organizations, end of quote, but also rely on factors of power and gender to determine who could be considered a leader or not. In Hodges and Rearing 2017, we can also read, the trait approach is suggested to focus too much on personal qualities or innate traits of a supposed leader, proposing that leaders are born and cannot simply be made. Such qualities have been observed throughout history. Additionally, leadership style approaches did not emerge until the late 1940s, with two key styles according to Bryman: the consideration style, in which trust is created between the leader and his or her subordinates, and the initiating structure style, in which the leader works with his or her subordinates in a more direct fashion. Moving into the 1960s, the contingency approach was created, placing greater emphasis on situational factors that call for different types of leadership, including relationship-focused leadership and task-focused leadership, according to Fiedler. In the 1980s, another approach emerged, known as the Transactional Leadership by Burns. This approach focuses more on the relationship between leaders and followers, where the leader provides rewards, such as status or resources, in return for compliance. In contrary, transformational leadership presumes that leaders act like managers of meaning within an organization. These are sense makers with visionary capacities and who can motivate and inspire their followers. These types of leaders are characterized by their charisma, inspiration, individualized consideration, and intellectual stimulation, as Bess noted. Meanwhile, more recent approaches have considered leadership behaviors and actions not necessarily belonging to designated leaders, but could be distributed or dispersed within an organization, as was pointed out by Denun. Mentz and Sims talked about the so-called super leadership, in which an employee's potential for leadership, especially self-leadership within an organization, is harnessed. With other words, leaders should be able to lead others to lead themselves. In contrast, leadership is also a result of different group behavior and dynamics. We could also think of shared leadership positions between different members of an organization. In contrast to transformational leadership approaches, strategies for managers in distributed leadership will promote self-leadership and encourage their followers to set their own goals. These are just a few approaches to be mentioned. Let's summarize the second lesson learned for today. Classical theory explored leadership with regard to certain traits and personality factors, to different styles, and to contextual and situational factors. Alright, that's it for today, dear listeners. In future episodes, we will have to explore other approaches as well, such as the adaptive or agile or digital leadership. I truly appreciate all your efforts to tune in my podcast for this episode. Please, if you liked this episode, don't forget subscribing to the podcast channel in your favorite podcast app, so you can stay up to date whenever a brand new episode of Managing Around is released. Stay safe, and we'll see us on the next episode.
If you liked this episode, please leave a review on the Apple's podcast website. If you are not using an iPhone, there's a link in the show notes. If you've got any ideas or thoughts on this episode, or if you've got an idea about new podcast topics or questions you'd like to discuss, send an audio file or voice note to hi@profmanagement.de. For any non-audio comments, drop a tweet or a DM to @profmanagement on Twitter, please. Thank you for listening and see you next time.